Meeting with the calls to pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'll have a roll call from Bonnie, please.
Commissioner Friend?
She's here.
She's here somewhere.
She's had to take a call.
Stepka?
Here.
Oh, she said Stepka?
Here.
Richardson?
Here.
Thomas?
Here.
Max Bauer?
Here.
Fleece?
Present.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Hooper?
Here.
Apparently, I took off with the sporting equipment in my car this morning, sorry.
All right, we'll have the approval of minutes.
So move.
Support.
Okay, we have motion to support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Okay, and now at this time, we have our first opportunity for public comment. Anyone who wishes to address the board at this time, please step forward. Seeing none, let's move on to special order of business. A, the request for support for HUD substantial...
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, aren't we supposed to approve the agenda?
Oh, approve the agenda, I guess we could do that too. Seeking a
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the agenda as provided.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion to support. Now we can, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Now we can move on to special order of business, the HUD Sustainable Communities Grant.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Matt McCauley. I'm the Director for Regional Planning at the Northwest Michigan Council of Governments. The reason I'm here this morning, a grant opportunity came available to Northwest Lower Michigan through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This grant opportunity represents a little bit of shift in federal policy as it relates to grant letting in that it is a joint grant opportunity between Department of Housing and Urban Development and Department of Transportation and the Environmental Protection Agency. So it's actually three federal agencies working together, and the idea is to support multi-jurisdictional efforts that recognizes the interdependent challenges of land use, transportation, environmental planning, civic engagement, housing, and so on. These types of activities have been, or this type of planning process has been really active in the Grand Traverse County region for many years right now. I think that the Grand Vision, for example, exemplifies a lot of this type of work. But the idea with this particular program is to be able to take local plans and studies and to be able to put them together, to aggregate them, and to look for regional commonalities throughout a larger region, and to be able to provide that to the state and to the federal government for the purposes of identifying priorities on a regional basis. This grant opportunity, only regional consortia are eligible to apply, so it has to be multi-jurisdictional, or numerous partners in the grant application. It is our intent to receive agreement and support from each of our 10 counties within our service area, also to work with the community colleges and the economic development organizations within the 10-county region. Right now, this is the second county board that I've visited. Yesterday I was in Manistee, and they did agree to this, but it is my intent over the course of the next 30 days to go to every county board and ask for this agreement and support. There is a match required to the grant. However, we will be able to demonstrate that through other sources, both cash and in-kind, so we're not asking for any cash match for the purposes of this grant. I'm happy to answer any questions about it. I assume in your packet there was a memo describing it, and then also I included a sample letter of support if the board so chose to support and agree to the proposal.
Matt, how much money are you going to ask for?
The maximum amount is $2 million. We anticipate that our request will be anywhere from $1.2 to $1.5 million.
And how long does the grant last for?
For 3 years.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make the motion to approve the letter of support. I do want to have discussion, but we want the motion first.
I'll support that.
We have a motion to support. Any further discussion? Sonny?
Matt, I guess my question is, we've just went through over the last, 5 years, the whole Grand Vision program. Is any of this money available for implementation, or is it strictly paper?
So there's actually two different programs that's coming out of this partnership, and this is the Sustainable Communities Program, and there's also a Community Challenge Program. And as a matter of fact, we're working with Grand Traverse County Planning Department and Gene Dorenzi on an application to help implement specifically some of the housing aspects that came out of the Grand Vision. So there's two concurrent programs here. This is dealing more with the planning, but there are some implementation dollars, and those implementation dollars we're assisting Grand Traverse County staff on right now to get an application in for those as well.
Because, and my problem is, I don't want to repeat the whole Grand Vision thing. I think
Right.
we spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of the community supported and participated. And to do another planning process doesn't make a great deal of sense to me.
Right.
If we can use this money for implementation, then I'm all in favor of that. But if it's strictly another plan, I won't support it.
Yeah, and the big difference between this and the Grand Vision would be that this is the Grand Vision was really based on a citizen-led process, a vision, working with the public, and this does include this, but this is geared more for local units of government and working with local municipalities and understanding the policies that support regional visions. So to make it more formalized, I guess would be, or taking the Grand Vision and like processes and moving them to a more formal product. And then, like I said, concurrent to that, it does position the region very well for implementation dollars, including implementation dollars that are coming from the same federal partnership, agency partnership.
Any other questions? Larry?
Matt, the problem I have with this type of a deal and some of the other things we've been involved in, I look at it as a effort to centralize a lot of things, which I don't know that I'm in favor of that. You can't take one paintbrush and paint the whole area. And I don't think I'm going to be able to support this. I just really have some problems with that. Plus, it's a grant, but eventually it's still our tax dollars, whether it's federal or state or whatever.
Two quick comments to that. Certainly, as the Director of Regional Planning and Community Development, my definition of regionalism is taking local decision makers and facilitating a conversation about cooperation. That's it. I don't believe that this nor my actions are working towards centralizing that planning, but rather celebrating that planning and bringing attention and credit to local decision making where we can. What was the second comment? That
One paintbrush.
I'm sorry, what?
One paintbrush?
One paintbrush, yeah. There isn't one paintbrush. Our service area is a 10-county region. Emmett County, south to Missaukee, west to Manistee, and everything in between. There are some commonalities from community to community, but there are also some distinctions, and those distinctions need to be highlighted and need to be recognized, both, in my opinion, at a local level and at a state and federal level, and I think processes such as this do provide that distinction.
But see, there's always strings attached. And one big string attached to even the application is it has to be regional. I disagree with that philosophy.
Right. Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons that things they're asking for more regional activities is that there's less and less resources available, and they're trying to incentivize greater collaboration and cooperation amongst local units of government. Also, in terms of it's grant dollars, it's tax dollars, I certainly agree with that, but to the best of my ability, I want to be able to bring as many of our tax dollars back to the region as I possibly can. These dollars will be let out, and to the best of my ability, I would like to garner them for our region and for them not to go to another region in the nation.
Thanks.
I mean, it seems to me that what we have is we have obviously a whole patchwork of independent local governments, and yet what one government does still has impact on its neighbors. The Grand Vision, which seems to enjoy widespread community support, has an idea of where we would like to go as a whole as a region, but yet it has to be implemented piece by piece. So I could see this being very useful in coordinating the efforts of not telling the local governments or units of government what to do, but hopefully coordinating their efforts so they're all working together toward the same goal, as much as they, wish to, of course.
Right.
So I will be supporting it.
Okay, we have a motion in support of the Sustainable Communities Grant letter. Any further discussion? I would like to call a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same?
Aye.
No.
Okay, have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Stepka?
Yes.
Richardson?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yeah.
Max Bauer?
No.
Fleece?
No.
Wheelock?
No.
Friend?
Yes.
Hooper?
Yes.
Passed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll go on item B, the 2009 annual budget audit.
Good morning. We need to speak into the mics. but-
Yes.
Good morning, Dean Bott, the County Finance Director. I wanted to come up and sit with Trina Edwards, who is with Dennis Gartland and Neergarth, the firm that does the county audit, so she didn't feel like she was all alone. Trina is responsible for planning for, overseeing the field work, and ultimately preparing the comprehensive annual financial report, which I provided to you last week. So with that, I will turn it over to Trina to do a brief presentation on the county audit.
Okay, good morning. I know that you did receive the audit report and the audit-related communications letter. And as far as the audit report, just to point out a few things in here, this is the CAFR, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report of the county. It is the responsibility of management of the county, and it was also prepared by management of the county. And our responsibility as auditors is to issue an opinion on it. And we did find that everything was fairly presented in accordance with accounting principles accepted in the United States of America. So that is what's considered a clean opinion, and it's the highest level of assurance we can give as auditors. I'd like to go over the audit-related communications letter next, and then I'll open it up for any questions, if that's okay. I know that you did receive the audit-related communications letter as well. The first page of that letter talks about compliance and internal controls, and we do look at the compliance with laws and regulations and internal controls of the county to prepare our tests for the audit of the county. And in that process, we did not find any items that were considered deficiencies or material weaknesses. On the second page of the letter, we did have one just informational item under the septic treatment facility. We know that you did have a study regarding that facility, and just recommending that the county continue to look at their options with that facility, and if at some point it is decided that the future revenues from that facility will not cover the cost, you may want to consider writing down the cost of that facility as an impairment of it. Down in the middle of the page here, the rest of the letter is just informational items You'll see fund balance reporting and governmental fund type definitions. So this is an informational item to let you know that there's a new pronouncement out that will affect your financial statements for next year. For 2011. It's for statements beginning after June 15th, 2010. And that affects the way you present your fund balances. So those are going to change in accordance with this new standard. At the bottom, down towards the bottom of the letter, it's discussing accounting estimates. We do look at estimates as part of the audit. The key estimates that the county has is the useful lives of the fixed assets, and then also the collectability of the accounts receivable. And we did look at the measurement methods for those estimates and found them to be reasonable. On page 3, we talk about significant disclosures, and so items that you may want to pay particular attention to are the reporting entity and the component units that are included in the audit report, which is in Note 1A to the financial statements. Also, the pension funded status, the other post-employment benefit disclosures, and the deposit and investment disclosures and risk management disclosures. In the middle of the page there, we did have some immaterial adjustments that were not posted. They're called uncorrected misstatements. We do just list those there. We looked at those overall in relation to the financial statements and did find that they were immaterial, and so we did not post those adjustments. The rest of the letter is, again, just required communications. We did not have any disagreements with management, no difficulties in performing the audit. Overall, everything went very smoothly. And then finally on page 4, the prior comment about the interest income allocation, we have recommended in prior years that the county consider allocating common cash interest. That was not done in 2009, but it was started in 2010. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions that any of you may have.
Anyone have any questions? Sonny?
Trina, the only question I had, and I wasn't sure I understood the difference in the way that the fund balance will be reported in the future compared to it is right now.
Okay.
We've spent hours discussing our fund balance over the last 2 years, and I just, I'm comfortable with the fund balance we have, but I'm not sure everyone else is, and I'm just wondering what the change in the reporting of that fund balance will be.
The titles are actually changing, and what is included in each portion of your fund balance is kind of changing. So for right now, you have restricted and unrestricted, and then in unrestricted, you have designated and undesignated. So in the future, there is still going to be restricted fund balance, but that's only going to be restrictions by external parties. So that's pretty similar to what it is right now. The next level that they're adding is called committed, and that's kind of a little bit similar to what you have now as restricted and also to board designated. And that is, committed fund balance is only available to be committed by the highest level of decision-making authority. So the county has to decide who that is. Likely it's the Board of Commissioners, and it would have to be through a board motion in the fiscal year of the audit. And then below that, we have assigned fund balance, which is, it's basically any fund other than the general fund. It's the remaining fund balance that's not restricted or committed. And then unassigned is below that, and that's usually the remaining balance of your general fund. So the county does have some options as far as assigning authority. We listed some bullet points down here, who they're going to decide has the highest decision-making level authority to commit a fund balance. And then also, you can adopt internal policies as far as how you're going to spend the fund balances, the different levels of fund balance. Another thing that's changing with this is if you have special revenue funds that are primarily supported by transfers from the general funds, those may not be considered special revenue funds in the future. They may need to get rolled up into your general fund. So that is something that I'm sure Dean will be looking at and analyzing.
Ross?
Dean, are we going to have another presentation on this next week at the BOC? Or?
I don't think you're going to have another presentation on it unless you need more information. What we're probably going to do is take the information today and then consider accepting the audit at the board meeting next week. But if you need more information, we can get that
Well, I'm going to
information.
have another discussion on it, I guess, is a better question.
You can,
I
sure.
think most of us got it this morning. I did get mine on Monday, but haven't really had time to.
That's fine,
No,
yes. It'll be on the
spend
agenda
much
next
time
week
with it.
for acceptance, and it can be pulled from the agenda if any commissioners have questions, and there can be a longer discussion about it.
Do you know what page either of you know which page the sections on the pension obligations are? Because I found that when I was thumbing through it.
Most of that would be disclosed in the notes. I'm guessing probably around page 65, the disclosures might start. We have both a defined benefit pension and a defined contribution. And just a quick comment for the public, the comprehensive annual financial report for the county also includes a number of component units. Included in our CAFR, in this financial report, are the financial statements for the County Road Commission. We have also the Department of Public Works component unit, a small operation, economic development, and for the life of me, the Drain Commission and also the Brownfield Development Authority are included. So it's a pretty broad
And also-
financial.
Also the pavilions, right?
Correct. The
which is
Grand
a rather
Traverse
large-
Pavilions is
A
included.
large component.
As-
And the
well.
health department.
I don't know if Trina was able to find those disclosures. I would
It was
assume.
64.
Yeah, no,
Pretty close.
I'm seeing them now,
Yes.
because I did, like I say, I did find them before. And I don't know if this is germane to the discussion, but does the county itself have any open units for defined benefit?
We currently have two, the Circuit Court Association and the Circuit Court Supervisors.
It's
Are-
just circuit court at this time.
And there are disclosures in probably one of the initial paragraphs in that section regarding the fact that we have primarily closed divisions, but there are the two open divisions.
Okay, well, in three units that I was looking at specifically, pavilions, the road commission, and Grand Traverse County itself, there's a unfunded actuarial accrued liability expressed as a percentage, and there's a huge variance between these three numbers. Well, the road commission is, it's like, that's expressed as 336%. This is on page 67.
The percentage, the unfunded liability as a percentage of covered payroll,
Yeah,
it is comparing that unfunded liability based on the annual payroll for
right.
that. So, yeah, those are very large percentages based on the fact that the base that they're comparing it to is, an annual number, a payroll amount for the current year, and that liability is, or has been accumulated over years of service in a period of time. That is a required disclosure based on the accounting standards that relate to pension benefits.
Well, by comparison, the pavilions, that number for the pavilions is 41% on page 66.
One of the reasons for the smaller percentages there, historically, the Grand Traverse Pavilions, they have done some things that Grand Traverse County, and I can't speak directly for the Road Commission, their multipliers are generally lower than some of the multipliers that we have for our pension, defined benefit pension, and they also have not offered the early retirement windows that the county has done, back over the course of the last 10 years.
We can look into this some more, but I do want to mention in terms of the road commission commissioner, that just offhand, one of my guesses would be that percentage has gone up significantly because they've cut the staff, and because they started with a small staff, and if it's based on the annual payroll, when the staff was cut by 6 or 8, that's going to inflate the percentage number because it's based against a much smaller payroll. But we can check that for you.
Well, if I can add to that, the fact that the percentages are lower for Grand Traverse, the pavilions, and higher for the road commission in Grand Traverse County, for Grand Traverse County, because we have the closed divisions, our payroll base is shrinking, which is the problem that we've discussed in the past. We're on a shrinking amortization, but basically the payroll, we have fewer employees, current employees that are on the defined benefit payroll. So, I mean, that payroll base has decreased since 2000, and that's one of the reasons for...
Yeah, because the number expressed for general government, that is what, actually the part that we actually oversee is 663%. So I guess my question is, is this any cause for concern, or is this what one would expect based on the situation?
That's a hard question to answer.
Okay.
The requirements for defined benefit and the accounting standards require us, I would be concerned if we were not making our required annual contribution to the pension.
Based on the actuarial provided us by the MERS retirement system.
Right.
And we annually meet that, and every year they reevaluate that.
That is
and give
correct.
us a new number for the next year. But, I think it's fair to say we've always been concerned about that. We know we have a $40 million liability there. We have, 40-some million dollars in that fund, and actually I think this would be better reflected by showing actual numbers as opposed to, showing percentages, because it kind of, paints a different picture. But I don't think it would be at all inappropriate for us to say we are concerned, and we've had a concern for this number, and it's something we continue to work at. That's why we're looking at options of other ways to fund this retirement plan. But no, it's a concern, Commissioner.
Okay.
It's the one area that we haven't really been able to address, probably simply because of the magnitude of it,
Yeah.
compared to the other deficit funds that we've tried to reduce or eliminate.
Okay. And the road commission is still all defined benefit?
I don't know the
No,
answer.
they have a defined contribution pension benefit as well.
But I think this is a good example, Commissioner, and what I would suggest is, if possible, instead of putting this under the consent calendar next week, what I'll do is I'll put it under my section, and any questions that commissioners have, if you would get them to Dean, maybe even this week,
Yeah.
we will try to have written answers for you next week that will present on each of the questions so that all the commissioners can see the questions and then the answers, and we can have more fuller discussion of it at that time. And so, Dean, with this one, I'd like to start, and maybe we could do a little analysis of the whole retirement issue for commissioners so they can see kind of the impact of this.
And
Commissioner, it's a good question.
particularly the funded ratio, because there's a fairly wide variance on funded ratio as well.
We can do that. And I don't know that road commission is all on defined contribution. Are they still
No,
like?
no, if you
some-
look at page 68, there are disclosures regarding, it starts off with the defined contribution plan for Grand Traverse County, which is the primary government, and then the middle paragraph, the discretely presented component unit, is the disclosure regarding the road commission's defined contribution plan.
And that's really an interesting percentage. It's a guess on my part, but, 10 years ago, everyone was on defined benefit.
Which
So-
would have made those percentages look a little more
Well, we had,
reasonable.
480 employees at that time on defined benefit. Now we're down to, I think it's around 150 employees on defined benefit, somewhere around there. So the cost, the
Payroll
debt,
base.
is still there, and it's applied to
shrinking-
a much smaller number
A
of
shrinking
employees.
base of people who are paying into it.
Yeah, but we're still paying it, we
Yeah,
pay it.
I
That's why, in these, we'll talk about budget a little later, but I'll give you a real quick example. One of the things that we're seeing is that some of the ways departments are talking about addressing their shortfall or their new target for next year's budget is by eliminating positions, long-term employees who might leave, who are on defined benefit. Okay, so they're saying, well, if this person leaves, it's a $50,000 salary, but I'm gonna save $120,000 because there's $60,000 in pensions assigned to him.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is, when he goes away, that department might save $60,000 in pension, but we have to spread it among everybody else because we still have to pay it, you see? So that's the kind of thing, some of the older commissioners, older on the board, can remember when I came here and said, we had one unit, and it was the captains and lieutenants, we were paying 120% of their salaries into their pension every year, more in pension than we were in salaries, but it was because that class had shrunk, we only had a few employees left, most of them, half of them were on defined contribution, so the expense assigned to them was huge. And in fact, Dean and I are now talking about changing the way we do that and providing, Dean has a better way of saying it, kind of a across-the-board allocation assigned for retirement to all the employees, and then for this defined benefit liability that we have, setting that aside a different way, so it's not charged back to each department accordingly. But it's a good question, and it is one of our top concerns.
Sunny?
Dean, when you report that, can you give us dollar amounts instead of the percentages? I think that's the thing that really screws us up when we look at it, because we have to remember how many people are in each of these different units, and that's the thing that really skews these numbers. And, you know, and we've talked about that previously, but when all you look at is the percentage, you know, it's, if I spend $6 and last year I only spent $1, I get a $600% increase, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I spent a ton of money. So,
Well,
you know, if we can have some dollar amounts with it.
I can do that. We will provide an analysis. I'm not sure you would want that for the board meeting next week, or if we bring that back to Ways and Means in August.
That's,
I can, well,
here's I don't know, with the budget responsibility that we have to get all these budgets in by Friday, I'm not sure that we won't have time to get it in the packet for next week. But, you know, we'll do our best to get it to you next week. But again, I would say that the questions are very good questions, but I don't think they really hinge on whether or not we accept the audit.
Well, no, I understand that.
I'm inclined to think that we're going to accept the audit, but I think we do want some additional discussions
really
about these
pleased that you
numbers,
have these questions.
which, you know, I think is great to do at Ways and Means next month or
We'll try to get them
anytime.
to you next week, but if not, we'll have them to you soon after
Well,
that.
that's fine. It's probably numbers we should have in terms of looking at the budget for next year.
Absolutely.
Rather than necessarily the audit, but.
We will get those answers to you, but please, any questions you have, get them to Dean or I, and we will get them answered for you. Good questions.
Just two quick questions. When you were talking about the fund balance designations, so that really hinges on delineating the fund balance and who's putting the restriction on it and for what reasons, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, right. And then you have identifying minimum fund balance requirements. That would be addressed by our fund balance policy, which we implemented earlier this year,
Right.
correct? Okay.
Well, I think
Thank you.
probably all this, Trina, would be decided in a new revised fund balance policy. And I'm assuming the county board will be the ultimate authority, you know, to make those designations. And so the new policy we just adopted, we probably have to redo it this next year to allow
Could you
that.
explain a little bit, though, the second bullet point, the order of spending from the restricted, committed? I mean, I know there's different designation, but order of spending, I'm just not sure exactly what you mean.
As part of your financial statements, we do have to disclose, for instance, if you have a resource where you have restricted and unrestricted money for that resource, we would expect your policy to designate whether you're going to spend your restricted money first and then unrestricted, or if you,
Okay.
typically that's how it's done.
Okay.
But basically, the order of how you would spend your fund balance.
Okay, so we can review that, or we can redo that policy and just wrap all of those into it?
We will.
Good.
Okay, so we're going to accept the budget next week?
We'll
Or the
bring it to
audits?
you next week, and we will start to answer the questions that you have.
Any other questions then? Okay, I think we can move on then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And good job, Dean and your staff, in
Absolutely.
helping put this together.
Okay, let's go to the consent calendar, please, Connie.
The purpose of the consent calendar is to expedite business by grouping non-controversial items together to be dealt with by one commission motion without discussion. Any member of the commission staff or the public may ask that any item on the consent calendar be removed therefrom and placed elsewhere on the agenda for full discussion. Such requests will be automatically respected. If any item is not removed from the consent calendar, the action noted, receive and file or approval, is approved by a single committee action adopting the consent calendar. A, receive and file. Number 1, child care fund. Number 2, consumer price index information. Number 3, Resource Recovery Department 2009 Annual Report. B, approve. Number 1, appropriation requests. Number 2, copy fees equalization.
All right, is there any member of the public that would like to remove anything from the consent calendar at this time? Is there anyone from the board that would like to remove something from the consent calendar? Sonny?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to remove the Resource Recovery Department Annual Report. I just had a couple questions for Bob, and I see he's not here today, so, in order to get the answers, we may have to move that back to RMA for next year, or next month.
Would you like to move that to RMA next month?
Well, I'm just, in order to ask questions, I don't see how we can do that without Bob here, and
That's what I'm suggesting, is we move that to RMA, and we ask Bob to come in and talk to you about it. Actually, I was going to point out, there's a lot of really new information in
Yeah,
that
there's-
report that I think,
there's information in here we've never seen before, and I think it's a very, very thorough report. It's just, I'd like to know where some of these numbers came from.
Is that agreeable to the
So we're just gonna
chairman
pull
of the
it entirely.
commission? We'll
Come
just
next.
table this and move it to RMA?
Yeah, I had a lot of questions too, and I'm sort of sorry that Bob wasn't here this morning.
And I think it's going to take some time for us to, ask the questions and have Bob answer the questions, and we certainly can't do that without him here this morning.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else have anything they'd like to remove? Seeing none, then Ross?
I move we approve the consent calendar as amended.
We have a motion to support. Can we have a roll call, please, Bonnie?
Commissioner Richardson?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
Max Bauer?
Yes.
Fleece?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Friend?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Hooper?
Yes. Okay, now we can move on to 8, department actions with the A, Building Authority. Resolution to approve the bond redemption period prior to maturity.
Bill Rokas, our treasurer, is going to talk to us about this.
Bill Rokas, County Treasurer. What came about, the Building Authority has a bond issue that matures in 2013 for the Health Department building on Garfield. And on October 1st of this year is the first year that we can call those bonds without a penalty. So we could call the bonds at par. And those are 5%, there's 5% interest on those bonds between now and 2013. So the Building Authority is requesting, we actually passed a resolution to call those bonds, but we have no funds to call them with because that comes from the county. So we're requesting that you also authorize us to call the bonds. What that means is that there's currently 400,000 outstanding bonds on that building and the debt. And that would, if we call them at par on October 1st of this year, we will save $30,000 in interest costs over the next 3 years. We still will have to make our interest payment on 2010, but the savings would be $30,000 for the 2011 through 2013 year. And we'd have some loss of interest on that funds, the 400,000 or the 300,000 that we would be calling early. We would not be earning interest on those funds, but in the current climate, we're not earning practically nothing on those funds right at the current, and we'd be saving the 5% interest. So that's where we're at. Questions?
So it's $300,000 to call the bonds, plus $100,000 to make the payment that's
Our current payment due on October 1st is $100,000.
$100,000, then
Plus
another,
$10,000 in interest, which
okay,
we'll have to pay.
and then another $1,500 for the expense of calling the 3 bonds.
Yes.
Okay.
Ross?
I would make the motion.
Support?
We have a motion to support to call the bonds before maturity.
Just want to be clear, this money would come out of the fund balance of the
Yeah,
county.
and in the policy that you adopted, I believe there is a provision specifically for using fund balance to call bonds. I think it's defined in that new fund balance.
That is
balance
correct.
policy.
The couple of things to mention here, the 2011 payment is obviously something that we're currently building into next year's budget, but it would require, when we make this payment, the building authority is a department in our general fund, so it requires a budget amendment to cover that debt service payment, so it will require the use of fund balance to make that happen.
In the interest of full disclosure, I want to make sure that everyone knows kind of what staff's intention was in regards to this. We had a lot of discussion on whether it made sense to call this or not, because it would tie up part of the fund balance. But beyond that, you'll recall that you told us several months ago that we could go forward with investigating the idea of remodeling and expanding the health department. Part of my intention in that regard was to find a way to bring that project back at no additional cost to the county from the general fund. The key to that is no additional cost. So what I was when I looked at that project, and right now I went over the plans yesterday with Fred Kiesler, the architect has those out for cost right now. Fred has a significant amount of money that he received. Remember those back payments that were owed from the federal government? Mm-hmm. And those payments, Fred, if you agree, is willing to make towards paying for this expansion of the building, which would save us hundreds of thousands of dollars. But then what I've been looking at as a financing mechanism is looking at the fact that we're spending about $120,000 a year on this issue. And so what I was looking to see is, and we're not in a position to ask you to consider that, but what I was looking to see is, could we come up with enough money from other sources than county funds, general funds, and then continue a bond issue that would continue out at no more than this $120,000. And instead of having 3 years on it, it might have 10 years on it. And then using that as a mechanism to fund the building. So I wanted you to be aware that that's one of the kind of the financing mechanisms I'm looking at, Dean and I are looking at in terms of if you decide to go ahead with that building. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. It doesn't really change anything here. What this impact of this is that we will be pulling $300,000 from our fund balance in order to make this payment to save the $25,000. I suppose it would reduce down the need in next year's budget by $120,000 that is currently in those numbers, although I would probably want to look at that and may ask you to look at a way to reserve that if in fact you decide to do the health department building change.
So, Dennis, so assuming that we pay off these 3 bonds and then that gives us bonding authority that we can still use then to...
No, we have lots of bonding authority.
No, I mean, but you were saying, then extending out 10-year bonds.
Oh, yeah, we would just do a new bond issue if we did.
It'd be a new bond issue.
Yeah, at a much lower interest rate,
Yeah,
like
okay.
1%, or 2%.
Not the 5%.
What's that? Not 5.
Not 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing, and there's more involved in it because if we do that expansion, 4,800 square feet of that is the new health clinic. They'll be paying the part of the cost to finance the health clinic. So we're still getting through the details of it, but I wanted you to be aware of it because it doesn't really impact this, but it does change. I was going to one of the things I talked to Bill and Dean about was paying this bond off anyway, but paying it off with the proceeds of a new bond that would finance that building improvement if you decide to move forward and would use revenue from the dental clinic and the health department's reimbursement from the federal government to help pay that off. But just wanted you to be aware of it.
Sonny?
I guess, I certainly agree with the idea of paying this off. I think it's going to save the county money. My one question was, I believe the health department also has a fund balance. Will we be using part of their fund balance for this payment?
Well, we talked about that, and originally we thought that was, it didn't matter, but I guess at this point, we decided this was a better route to go in the event that you decide to move forward with that building expansion, because it's one pocket or the other pocket.
Right.
It's either going to come out of there for this, or it's going to come out of that fund balance for the building if you decide to do it. And you always have control of that fund balance by the amount you appropriate from the general fund to support that. And if you appropriate $300,000 less, that 300,000 is going to have to come out of their fund balance. So one way or another, you can get that. But that's a good question, Commissioner.
Well, and I don't think there's any of us that have been to the health department and saw the constraints of their facility to realize that they absolutely need more. And I was pretty excited about the idea of the expansion compared to trying to go out and build a whole new building. So, I'm glad we're moving forward with that, so. I don't have a problem, I just had to ask the question.
It was a good
We were
question.
using
We
their
had a lot
fund
of
balance
discussion
also.
about it.
Beth?
So which allocation right now pays for the current bond payment through the health department, right?
No, it comes from the general fund.
Comes
It's
from
part
the
of your
general fund.
annual debt,
Okay,
just like the district court building and things like that.
okay. So this would be affecting then those projected fund balance numbers you have on page 69 in the packet?
Yes.
Ross?
You mentioned this money that's due the health department from, was it from the federal government, from Medicaid?
Medicaid
money,
cost
right?
settlements.
It's been received, Commissioner.
How much was it?
$600,000, roughly.
But that could also be used to absorb some of the blows that the budget is going to be taking next year anyway, correct? For
That's correct.
operations.
And we've had 2 meetings with Fred on that, and I expect that some money from their fund balance will be needed to do that. Their fund balance currently sits at around $1.5 million, $1.6 million,
Which is quite a
with
bit.
that money.
Yeah, but which is quite a bit better than it was before, obviously.
Yeah, and that
Okay.
600,000 obviously was a boost that we had always showed it, but we never had the money until very recently.
Beth?
So I'm going back to how it changes the numbers that you have included in the packet. If we're looking at 20% fund balance, so we have right now almost 600,000 in excess of that, we would be utilizing about half that then, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the bond redemption prior to maturity.
Hold on, I have another question for Dennis. Particularly going through this budget process, and I know some of the departments were aware of the fact that, we have excess fund balance right now over the policy, and looking at that for potentially some capital expenditures. Did you have any other plans out there, suggestions for these amounts?
I'm
Is there
sorry.
anything else impending that you're planning on anticipating using that for?
The fund balance?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I mean, if the county board, we're going to have a discussion about that later, if the county board chooses at some point, and I've not seen any, interest in doing that, to utilize fund balance in next year's budget, and as I said, I haven't seen the board interested in that to a large degree, then we would probably suggest to you that it be used for capital or one-time expenses, but I haven't heard that yet, so, no, we have no other plans for it.
Okay.
And Ross?
And Beth, the 300,000 that's the motion on the table right now, is not coming out of the health department fund balance, it's coming out of general fund.
No, I understand that.
Okay, because I heard you say, well, half of that'll be,
No,
half of that 600,000 for the health department.
It's 300,000 they're asking for, and right now we have roughly 600,000 in excess of.
Of the 20%.
Let's say, for
So that's
example,
half of.
let's say, for example, when we bring you this plan and the budget cost, you look at it and you go, it's too much money. We're not going to do this expansion at this time, okay? And you've made this decision. There would be a very simple way to recoup that $300,000. Let's say you decided we're not going to do the building and we're going to utilize the fund balance down to 18%, because that's a kind of what I'm hearing you saying, that's a possibility. And it went from 600,000 to 300,000. What you simply do is you tell the health department, we're paying off the building from your fund balance, and instead of giving you $1.3 million, we're giving you $1 million. That frees up $300,000 in your general fund and takes you back up to $600,000 available. So there are ways to do that and to have that money back if that was the route that you decided to go.
Okay, well, because, like you said, well, we'll be discussing that fund balance later, and I'm thinking, we're discussing something now that really affects
Absolutely.
that discussion.
And, unfortunately, the way the design goes, we're not going to be talking about the building, maybe till August or even September.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same? Okay, thank you, Bill. And now we go on to B, the Brownfield and EDC grant request.
Good morning. My name is Jean Dorenzi with the Planning and Development Department. The request today in front of you is from the Economic Development Corporation Board to approve a request from the City of Traverse City for a $25,000 technical assistance grant from the revolving loan fund. The technical assistance grant is eligible through our revolving loan fund if it helps promote the economic health and well-being of a community. If the city is awarded this grant, it would provide over $12 million for a company for a private expansion and help retain 120 jobs for the community and create 47 new jobs for the community. As you know, the revolving loan fund, the EDC reviews and recommends to this county board. The county board schedules a public hearing, and the request then goes to the state of Michigan to release those funds. So we are in a unique opportunity for Grand Traverse County to have this ability to utilize the revolving loan fund to make applications to the state of Michigan for block grants such as this that the city is reviewing. Brian Crow, the Community Development Director for the City of Traverse City, and Tino Breitup, Senior VP of the Chamber of TBEDC, is here that they can answer questions relative to the block grant and its use, and I can answer questions relative to the revolving loan fund.
And our city manager is here as well.
And Ben Bifus, our city manager, is here as well.
Hey, Ross?
I'd like to make the motion, just put on the table, to approve a $25,000 grant to the City of Traverse City from the revolving loan fund for technical assistance in the application process for a community development block grant, and schedule a public hearing for July 28th, 2010 at the Board of Commissioners meeting.
I'll support.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? Dennis?
Just one clarification question. The city will use this money to contract with a consultant to do the application. This won't be city staff that'll be reimbursed for the time or anything like that?
It would be a consultant that they would hire. The application is an in-depth application process.
Sonny?
I guess I have two questions. One, this is a grant, not a loan to them, correct?
That is correct.
And the second question, do we have a motion of support from the City Commission for this project?
I'll refer to Brian or Mr. Bifus relative to the process on the city's behalf. I'm not sure if it's been in front of the City Commission yet.
Brian Crow, Community Development Director. The City Commission has been made aware of this process, but they haven't been asked to take action yet because there's a lot of steps that have to be done. The environmental assessment alone is this much paper. The notice of intent is another batch of paper, and the grant request itself is another batch of paper. The state asked us to ask the EDC for technical assistance to make this application. So the answer to the question is they haven't had an formal vote, but they're aware of what we're doing.
Well, please don't take it personal, but they've been aware of what we've been doing in the EDC and brownfields. Have spent a lot of our money along the way that the City Commission didn't support when it came down to making the decision.
I've certainly...
And that's why, until such time as the City Commission supports this project, I will not vote to give them the money.
You mean like the refurbishment of the hotel?
The list is longer than that.
Ross?
This is basically a $25,000 investment by the EDC to get $1 million grant, not a loan, but $1 million grant from the state. And in addition to that, the city will be, I guess, required actually to provide tax abatements to the company, which is getting the money, so that the company then qualifies for an MEDC, MEGA, excuse me, okay. I always get mixed up on the acronyms.
It is confusing, and there will be city involvement in order to make this all happen. They will have to consider the IFT. They have been supportive of these in the past because they're a part of a complex formula of assistance to this company to make $12.1 million in investment in our community over 2 years. So the history is there on these kinds of issues, but Commissioner Wheelock, I can't promise anything at this point because we simply aren't far enough along to get the city commission's vote on anything.
Is it safe to say that the $25,000 will not be spent until the city gets its ducks in a row, or not?
Our intent was to quickly hire, there's a time frame issue that we're working with the company on, and our intent was to quickly issue an RFP and get the consultants working on these documents. Theoretically, we could seek, it wouldn't have any official standing because they still have to go through the process on the IFT. Our goal was to get this going fast, so I'm not sure that can be done. It could be done in a resolution format perhaps, and I don't know whether Mr. Byfuss could add to that, but like I said, they're aware of what we're working on, and the best we can hope is that this is a compelling argument for our community.
I think the key here is we're talking about a $12 million investment, 120 jobs retained, and 47 new jobs created. And it's really a drop in the bucket. I know it's a lot of money, $25,000, but, we have this huge economic development fund, and this just seems as appropriate as it can get in terms of trying to support, economic development. In this case, in the city, and whether it's township or city, it really doesn't matter. It's something that I think is important to do.
I just, from my perspective, I absolutely support, providing jobs in this community. I would just like to see even a letter of resolution from the city commission that they support the process. I've been burned more times than I want to talk about.
Okay.
Eyes in the back of my head.
Dan Byfuss, Traverse City Manager. The City Commission will need to take action to actually execute the contract to retain the consultant to undertake the work, and that will need to occur before any funds are spent. So the City Commission will be formally on record before a single dollar is spent.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, we need a roll call, please, Bonnie?
Commissioner Max Bauer?
Yes.
Fleece?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Richardson?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
Hooper?
Yes. Thank you. Motion passes, thank you.
Funds will not be expended until we have their resolution, correct?
All right, and now
I
we're
said
moving
funds
along.
will not be expended until we have their resolution, correct?
Okay. Now to item C, Finance, the General Fund June 2010 trial balance and revenue expenditure summary is on page 60.
Well, starting on page 61 is the general fund trial balance for the month of June, or it's information in our primary fund as of June 30th. You'll see our cash balances are positive in total, but the common cash is negative. Revenues are trailing significantly behind the expenditures when you look at the revenue and expenditure control, and again, that is primarily due to the fact that our tax levy, our main revenue source, will not be received until the month that we're currently in. The tax bills went out in last week of June, early July, so we'll see better numbers as we go through the balance of the year in terms of cash balances and revenues in comparison with expenditure totals. And then on pages 62 and 63, I'm indicating or summarizing the main differences when we compare the current year through 6 months with the prior year. And then if you concentrate, or if we start on page 62, the revenues, I've highlighted some of the significant differences. Tax revenues are down primarily because of the Board of Review and the Michigan Tax Tribunal adjustments and payments that had to have been made. Other areas of importance or significance, the local unit contributions. If you look at the note some of these reductions have actually been built into the budget. The MSU grant funding that we no longer receive for the PAT is affecting the year-to-date numbers, but those have not been built into the budget, so they don't have a budget impact directly, but they do cause the revenues in the current year to be lower than the prior year. And then the other main difference there is just the timing of when we've invoiced for the contract law enforcement services, so that should reverse itself in July. The interest and rents are down. As Bill mentioned, interest rates are very low. No sign of change there. The biggest concern I would have is in the charges for services area. Family court, juvenile revenues, reimbursements are down. The Register of Deeds revenues are down. On a positive note, district court revenues are higher through 6 months this year than they were a year ago. And the revenues are also down in circuit court. Whether or not this pattern continues for the balance of the year, I don't know, but if it does, it could have an impact on the 2010 revenues that are budgeted.
Okay, any further, Ross?
Going back to the trial balance, where is the money that we're owed on the septic plant reflected in there?
It would be recorded in account 067, due from other funds.
Due from other funds?
Yes. And actually, Commissioner Richardson, that is the exact dollar amount that is due from the septic facility.
What about the 58,000 from May?
From May.
Because that amount
No,
is
that
last October.
that is not reflected. I have not booked or recorded any type of receivable or cash advance for that at this point.
Okay.
We're assuming we're going to be reimbursed that.
Well, I know we asked to be, but that was 2 months ago.
When would that be, when you book that if we don't?
Well, we've made those debt service payments, and Bill can correct me if I'm wrong, but right now, that's just running as a cash deficit in the fund. I mean, we have covered that with our common cash.
Sure.
But the septic fund, Fund 590, is, the cash is in the red because of
Okay.
that. I don't mean to be cute, but
No, I understand. And then on page 63 under expenditures, the rather large increase in judicial and public safety from last year to this year.
Just briefly, the judicial is primarily due to the timing of when I billed indirect costs, and that's correspondingly causing the increase in the transfers out. We billed indirect costs this year sooner than we did a year ago. I mean, those are within budget, even though the expenditures in those categories are higher than the
So
same.
basically, the indirect cost was just moved up
Yes,
this year from last,
the
as
expenditure
far
has,
as judicial goes.
yes.
And then public safety?
Public safety, there's two main reasons that those numbers are higher. I'm not seeing any budget issue. We're not running over budget, but we have been at full staffing levels in both corrections and our road patrol. In the prior year, we had some staffing vacancies. We've also, the current year expenditures are higher because of wage increases that have been negotiated and bargained for. My note indicates that we have the management, the HPL contract at the jail.
It's a big chunk.
That's a big chunk, but it, in part, is offset by staffing reductions because we did not retain our nurses. But it is primarily because we're at full staffing levels for 6 months this year versus we had a number of vacancies in both road patrol and corrections a year ago.
So the capital expense involved with the
New World software?
booking software
That is not
is
in...
not reflected in that,
No,
right?
that's not in the general fund, that's in the capital improvement fund.
Those staffings will change too, because I think right now the road patrol has 2 vacancies, soon to be a third, And there are 2 people off on disability at the jail, but that is being offset, I think, by overtime. That would be my guess.
Correct, and I failed to mention that dispatch personnel, we're currently
That's in there, too.
a higher staffing level for 6 months in 2010 versus a year ago.
Any other questions? Okay, can we move on to budget adjustments?
Just unless there are specific questions on any of the adjustments, I want to walk through these fairly quickly. The first one on page 65 is for overtime. As Dennis mentioned, overtime is tracking higher in dispatch and also in corrections. We tend to under-budget overtime in the jail as part of our way to balance the budget. But so far, I'm able to cover those with personnel. I'm actually using, transferring funds from dispatch to cover the overtime in corrections because of their, they had budgeted some part-time temporary funding that we're not using, and that's helping to cover the overtime in the jail at this point. The next adjustment listed under the overtime are the revenue adjustments for the tax reduction in the general fund. With the adjustments that are here, I'm about $100,000 shy of the $750,000 reduction that we presented last month. And I simply did not have time to make the balance of those adjustments to get them in the packet. Those will come next month, and then we'll have brought down the general fund budget by the $750,000 to reflect the reduced tax revenues.
Any questions? Sonny?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the budget adjustments as outlined by the Grand Traverse County Finance Director.
Support.
A motion support. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Fleece?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Richardson?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
Max Bauer?
Yes.
Hooper?
Yes. Okay. And now we are on to unfinished business, I believe.
There is
No? Pardon me?
There is none.
Oh, no unfinished business. Okay, that makes it better. Let's move on to new business then, and the budget discussion.
Okay. We want to talk about 2 primary areas today, tax revenue and then fund balance. But I want to give you just a quick overview of how things are going. Dean and I have been meeting pretty much every day, all day with departments, and generally what we're finding is departments are making a sincere effort to try to make those numbers. I think in some cases it's going to be real difficult. And the example I used for you before was the Sheriff's Department, where they have to cut $1,073,000, and $422,000 of that is based on the fact that they got part of that allocation cut as a result of having a $4 million jail. Well, the jail has to run 24 hours a day. We've already made cuts over the years on that. That's going to be a tough one for them to do. But they are making a sincere effort to try to come up with that, and we've already received a handful of budgets, probably 5 or so, that have come either to the dollar or very close to the dollar of making the cuts. So they're all working on that, and they're all preparing, you should be aware, their cases for why they should get a piece of that $750,000 that's in the contingency. Yesterday, we met with the Veterans Board, and one of the things that they are talking about and considering is there's an 1899 law that says up to 1/10 of a mil should be spent on soldiers, sailors relief, and they were hopeful that that 1/10 of a mil is something that could be allocated outside
Our allocated cap of 15 mils.
Right. And so they were hoping that 1/10 of a mil could replace this and be used to supplement their budget. But we've done a lot of research on that. We talked with Peter Cole, who's written several articles on it, an attorney, and been through the law on it, and it's clear that they can allocate, you can allocate up to 1/10 of a mil, but it comes from under the cap. So it comes out of one pocket and goes in the other pocket. And I explained to them yesterday, Dean and I did, that if you allocate 1/10 of a mil, and it's $400,000 and your budget is 40 million, it means you only have 600,000 left for everybody else. So it's kind of a wash. And the law is clear on that. It says that you shall levy an amount not to exceed a tenth of a mil. So it doesn't, and we've talked to the attorneys and that the interpretation is clear. It means you can levy anything up to a tenth of a mil. So you're right now levying somewhere in the order of $320,000, $327,000 into that budget. So you're clearly meeting the obligation. But I think it's possible you may hear from the Veterans Board that they would like you to give a tenth of a mil towards veteran services. And I explained to them yesterday that in doing so, that not only doesn't address the amount of money they needed to cut, the $35,000, but it means that's more that they would need that would have to come again from somebody else. So we had a really good discussion with them, and I don't know what the result of their meeting was. They had a budget meeting yesterday, but departments are exploring all options, as best they can. And I guess in summary, I just want to say that I think they're being really responsive to try to meet these numbers pretty much across the board. I think another thing I want to tell you so that you have some perspective on this, and it's really a matter of us communicating better. It's so hard not to send mixed messages. There's a lot of morale issues out there as a result of a couple of things. The decisions that you've made in the last couple of weeks to add a planning position, because that gets broadcast to all employees because it's a union position or it's a position that's available. And what we're working on is trying to find a way that when we advertise those so employees know they can apply for those positions, that somehow we can get the word out. And I'm going to work on getting the word out to say, yes, this is a new position, because they're saying, how can the county board put in new positions when we're cutting? And what they don't understand is that's a grant-funded position, and it doesn't require general fund money. And so that really sends a mixed message, and it's something we have to work on so that they better understand how these things happen. Or they read in the paper that we're looking at a new housing grant program. Well, how can the county put money into a housing grant program when they're telling us to cut? Well, it's foreclosure money. And so I think, we have a department head meeting coming up. We're going to work on that with them, and we're going to ask them to disseminate that information to the employees. And I'm probably going to write something up to the employees kind of explaining how these things are much more complicated than they appear on the surface. So just wanted you to have that kind of, those are the kinds of things that we're trying to get through. But it's been going very well so far, and Friday we'll see how it ends up. And I guess with that, I'd like to let Dean go through this tax revenue analysis to give you an idea of how we propose this in the budget that we're going to present you.
On page 68, I try to keep things as simple as possible, but we wanted to give you a better understanding of the tax revenue number that we're building into the 2011 budget. And the thing that we know for sure is what our 2010 tax revenues are based on the bills that just went out and information from both equalization and the county treasurer. So that first number on this page is a given. That's our revenue that we'll realize this year. We have talked to you about the dollar amount of the cases that are pending before the Michigan Tax Tribunal, roughly just slightly over 67 million. Right now, we're building in, or we have built into our preliminary budget numbers that half of that revenue could potentially be lost. That's just an estimate at this point. There's no way to determine what that loss, if any, could actually end up being. So with that reduction, the 167,000 brings us down to an adjusted revenue. And at this point, we're not building in any change for a CPI increase or for any increase in taxable value for new construction, additions to the tax roll, and there are always losses, but we're not building in any increase for those types of changes. And then showing what a 1% increase in the CPI would generate, and also what a 2% increase and the CPI would generate in terms of the total tax revenue, and then also what those dollar amounts are by themselves at the bottom of the page. Earlier in your packet, I did provide information on the CPI through a 12-month number, which is not the same fiscal year that coincides with the state year, which will be the 12 months that determines what the CPI adjustment is. I received the June information earlier this week, and the June information had actually dropped 0.9%. So the information in your packet shows a 2% increase for a period of 12 months, but 1 month later, it has dropped down to 1.1. So it fluctuates every month, and we can't tell you right now what that increase will be for the state's fiscal year. We will not know that number, that amount, until about the middle of October. So it's just information that we wanted you to have in terms of what we know about our tax revenue, what increases in the CPI could do, and obviously the big unknown is what could happen with the cases before the Michigan Tax Tribunal.
So I want to add to what Dean has told you to tell you this. This is not the absolute most conservative approach. I guess the most conservative approach would be to say, well, this year we lost $750,000 in taxes, and project another loss next year in taxes beyond that, or at $750,000. Our track record has been a 6 to 8% increase in taxes for a long, long time, at least 10 years, perhaps more. It's been more. But, so this was a one-year drop. So we didn't say we're gonna drop them again. It's a one-year number. But we took what we're gonna have this year after the $750,000 drop, and we used that as the base. And then we said, so that's a lower base. Then we said, we have 67 million in tax appeals out there. We're gonna figure we're gonna lose half of those. And we dropped it again. So that's the number. So it's a pretty darn conservative number. In terms of this consumer price index, increase, you're probably not going to know that until the first part of October. So I don't know that in any way it's going to come into play in your budget process. So, but just so you start to think about this, if we're faced with, we're faced with these really significant cuts, if something turns around, and I'm just throwing out like ideas for you to start thinking. If something turns around and you adopt a very conservative budget, and it's really to the bottom, there's nothing else to cut. One of the options you would have is to say, well, I think we have $800 and some thousand built in to go into that CIP fund, and we need about 500,000 of it or so. I'm using round numbers, and we'll talk in more detail. We need 500,000 to pay that road commission bond. Okay. What you could do, if you needed some money, you might say, well, instead of 880,000 going into that fund, we're only going to put the amount of money we got to put in there to fund the road commission bonds or our absolute needs. And then if more taxes come in as a result of the CIP, we may bump that number back up to rebuild that CIP fund. I'm just giving you ideas of how you might be thinking about this money. But understand, we're not figuring any of that into this budget. We're taking the bottom line, very conservative. Did you understand kind of what I was getting at there? Okay. So that's just to give you an idea. In terms of taxes, I think we feel pretty good about this, but we'd be lying to you if we told you that we were sure that next year we wouldn't have to come back to you and say taxes went down another $500,000. We just don't know. We only have 1 year history of drops.
So this is about, the tax revenue is what, about 55% of total revenue? Somewhere in that neighborhood?
Yes, approximately.
It's around there.
Yeah. So what about the other 45%?
Well, right now, we're working with the departments. I projected based on what I had seen through 5.5, 6 months, but we're asking the departments to review my numbers. They obviously have better knowledge of how their numbers work, but we've built that into our revenue projections. I mean, for example, in the Register of Deeds, with the revenues being down this year, we're not budgeting at the same level that we have in 2010.
Right.
We're taking those reductions into consideration and the targets.
No, I guess what I'm asking for is, what's your projection right now for that other 45% of the revenue? Is it going down a lot, a little, staying the same?
So I was wondering the same thing. So you've got good hard numbers you've got good numbers, or what you feel comfortable with the tax revenues, the 2010 tax revenues.
Yep.
But you have to go from that to the, example on the next page where it says, example of where revenues of 38 million. So the difference between those tax revenues and your 38 million are your other funding sources.
Correct. Let me take a stab at this. I tend to be very conservative. Dennis will tell you that. In the analysis that we did for the general fund, only a handful of departments actually entered the revenue side of the general fund budget. So it was up to me to determine what the other 45% of revenues would be. In the case of the jail, I'll give you one example, corrections. I was seeing the reduced revenues in 2010, and I projected what I felt was a good number. Well, Captain Hall came back and said your numbers are too low, and he provided information. I feel comfortable with the numbers, the other 45%. I mean, it's not at the same level as the 45% would be in the 2010 budget. The numbers are down, and that's part of the reason, we were giving the departments a number. We built that projected revenue and then allocated the tax revenues based on their share compared, to the 2010. I mean, the other 45% is down as well.
And so...
do you know what percentage, roughly?
No, not yet.
No.
Until we meet with the departments, we won't know for sure. We know they're down. But with one or two exceptions, those revenues are directly tied to expenses within a department. Okay? So by allowing those departments to maintain their revenues that they generate, and then meeting with them to analyze them and come to an agreement on what those revenues projections look like, we're still keeping this budget in balance. So in other words, if a department had $1 million and 200,000 of it was revenues, and now they lost 100,000 in general fund support, so now they're down to 900,000, and they can only show $150,000 in revenue, they're going to have to come in with a budget of 850,000. So that budget is going to be balanced on revenue. Where it impacts others is where the revenue is not used just for operation of that department, but supports other departments, such as interest from the treasurer's office and register of deeds revenues that exceed the budget need.
Well, I mean, we're talking, what, $16, $17 million in revenue?
Something on that order.
Yes.
I'm trying to look at the big picture, not, slicing it up each individual department. I mean, of that revenue, what portion of it that's going away by your estimates right now? I mean, you are working on the budget for next year.
Yeah, but we have not met, we've only met with about 3 or 4 departments to actually go over the revenue numbers. So until we meet with the other departments, and we'll have that to you by August 19th, I don't think we feel comfortable telling you. But we can tell you generally they're down, and it's probably going to be down less than 5%, but don't know for sure at this point.
Other questions? Okay, well, it's going to be an ongoing discussion, obviously, through October. So we can move on now to budget presentation by Chris Matthews.
Well, we want to talk about fund balance.
Oh, I'm sorry, fund balance is the next one.
Chris.
Move on, then.
Go ahead, Dean.
Page 69. Again, trying to keep this as simple as possible, but we're starting with our fund balance that we began 2010 with, 9.1 million, showing the budgeted use of fund balance in the 2010 budget, which leaves a projected fund balance at the end of the year of $8,171,927. That does not include what we discussed earlier in the meeting, if we would budget additional fund balance to cover the calling of the building authority bonds. I then listed the 2010 budget for reference. It's at $39.4 million. And then I'm trying to get into a discussion of the board's fund balance policy that was adopted. The target range is 18 to 20% of general fund revenues. And then what I was doing in the middle of the page was showing the range at those various levels, or at various levels in terms of a total budget based on revenues. At 4 different levels, 36 million, increasing by $1 million up to 39 million, and then what the 18 and 20% numbers would be. And then at the bottom showing how what might be available if you considered using fund balance, and it does hinge on where that final budget would end up. You know, we're not going to have a budget at the same level as 2010 unless we put in a significant amount of revenue, and the only revenue source that you would have would be a large usage of your fund balance. But so if I can walk through the analysis at the bottom of the page, the last 4 lines, using the projected fund balance at the end of 2010, if you had a target level at 20%, you would your target then would be 7.6 million, and compared to where we project to end 2010, you would have $571,000 of fund balance that you could use. If the target were at the lower end of the range, 18%, the number fund balance would be, I believe it's 6.8 million. I didn't show that here, but your fund balance that you would free up or have available to use would be $1,331,927. And Dennis will clean up that explanation like he always does.
No, I was just going to add that we'll redo this for you and give it to you next week, showing the reduction that we just approved to use the fund balance to take care of that debt at the health department. So we'll give you a new number next week just so you can see it. And the reason we put this together was we wanted you to understand we put no fund balance into, we're going to put no fund balance into the budget we give you on August 19th. There will not be any. We're not anticipating using any. But some commissioners, a couple of commissioners have come to me and asked me, what is the difference if we decide to go to 18% and still stay within our policy? So we're just trying to give you this information so that everyone has it. We like to share it with everybody. So that's really what we had. We'll clean it up for you next week and reduce it by the $300,000 that we just used for paying off that debt early. And unless you have any questions, that's really all we wanted to show you. Okay?
Okay. Oh, Larry has one quick one, I guess.
I have one comment, Dennis,
Yes.
regarding earlier conversation and the perception the employees have and so forth. Just based on some interrogations that I've had where I was being interrogated in the past week, I think what would really be helpful, and I think I heard you say it, I think you and Dean perhaps should prepare a letter and put it with the paycheck, so every employee, I realize the department heads, but a lot of times you don't get the trickle down, so, and that would squelch a lot of, because you can explain in there a short synopsis about the different funds and so forth, and...
I will do that. That was my plan, Commissioner. I think we need to do that, you know. I think we owe it to the employees so that they understand, because I think they're confused right now, and there's good reason for it.
Well, but they're not angry. They're just really, like you said, that's a good word. They're confused, and they certainly had some very good questions. So I think that would just take care of it.
We will do that.
Could you put a copy of that letter with our...
Absolutely, I will.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question still on this other topic, Dennis?
Yes.
The thing, obviously I think it's a good thing what we're doing with the fund balance and having the target policy. I mean, anything in excess of our policy is basically, taxpayers' money that we're holding, and we need to identify a use for it or put it someplace to be dedicated or reserved, as we talked about with the audit. And anything below was not responsible financially, bond ratings and so forth. So I think that that's a good thing. But once we're going through these cuts, and I was looking through page 73, where it showed the surplus over the years. And was it in 2004 when you made significant cuts last time?
Yes, these are Commissioner Max Bauer's numbers.
Okay.
Well, actually, they're Dean Bott's numbers.
Well, they're Commissioner Max Bauer's graphs.
Graphs,
That's
okay.
correct.
Well, and I'm just trying to-
We did make cuts in 2004.
When I looked at this, the thing that popped into my mind was, I was thinking it was 2004 that you said significant cuts were made, and I'm looking at how the surplus grew after that. And what I want to make sure that we don't do this time is make such significant cuts that we end up adding to the fund. I don't want to make the cuts so deep that we end up, and being so conservative that we end up adding to the
I understand.
fund balance
The
later.
point, and that's a good point. The difficulty is that you're doing it 2 years ahead of an unknown condition. So really, this was, in 2004, was a response to where we saw things in 2003.
Okay.
And it was primarily the result of being told that revenue sharing was going to be taken away at $1,500,000 a year.
Okay.
It's going to be an initial $1,500,000 cut in the budget, and it was going to be replaced by this, this tax shift, and then eventually given back to us by the state. Well, in 2003, the county board said, we don't believe we'll ever see that money again. And so the board came up with this plan to cut expenses and to put money aside in an equal amount that we've talked about, to replace the revenue sharing. So they said, we're going to take the big hit now, and really, the impact of what they did in 2004 really won't show its real benefit until 2014, when revenue sharing goes away if the state doesn't give it back to us. It so happened that then in 2005, 6, and 7, we had these huge increases in
Property tax revenue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Property
And
tax
interest.
revenue, and interest was huge. Interest went from under $1 million to 1 year about $1.9 million. Okay, that's what made those big growths. So that kind of stuff is unanticipated. Just like in 2006, it would have been very difficult to anticipate interest revenues at $400,000 now. We went in 2007, and I'm summarizing the numbers. Is 1.8, 1.9 about right?
1.8 was the largest.
1.8 in 2007,
Yes.
down to 400,000 this year? Yeah. Last year. $400,000 or $500,000. I mean, $1.5 million in lost revenue, just from interest alone. So that's the kinds of things that are hard. But I think if we can figure out a way to do it, that's a very good point, Commissioner. You don't want to cut so deeply and then see this huge amount of money. But I think to a large extent, those were unanticipated
Okay.
changes.
Carry on, yes, please.
All right. First of all, I want to thank Dean for getting the spreadsheet to me that I requested. What I was trying to do was I was trying to take a look at historical trends. Certainly, a budget is a plan for the future, but it does help me as I take a look at what we've done in the past and trends. My graphs are somewhat crude. I'm a little out of practice. I haven't done this in years, but the first graph that I've got on the screen is the budget surplus. And you will note that when you take a look at the spreadsheet that Dean provided, that in 2001 our fund balance was approximately $5 million. We're at $9 million right now. And what jumped out at me, and I met with Dennis on this, is that 75% of that $4 million increase came in 2 years, 2006 and 2007, and it came from property tax revenue. And so the reason I'm bringing this forward is I believe that we have to be more conservative in our approach. When you stop and take a look that Michigan is number 7 in foreclosures. We lead the nation in unemployment. We lead the nation in exodus. 70% of our college graduates have to leave the state in order to find work. My question to the board, and I'm not asking you individually, but stop and think about, do you honestly believe that we are going to have an opportunity for property tax revenue increases anytime in the near future, like we did in 2006 and 2007. I believe the answer to that question is no. Now, one of the things I've heard from commissioners that have been on the board a great deal longer than I have is, well, you know, we had our fund balance at $5 million and we've got it at $9 million now. And the board did pass a policy, 18 to 20% fund balance policy. And so I went back to 2001, and we have never been, since 2001, we have never been below 18% in our fund balance. The next budget graph is the expense. I went back again to 2001, and I did a mean average. And the average expense increase, the mean average, that I found was 4.66%. Now, I did, as Commissioner Richardson pointed out this morning, we just got the audit this morning, and I was flipping through the book, and I did see that the audit book notes that expenses are up, or projected to be up like 4.5%. So I really wasn't that far off. But at 4.66%, our expenses are climbing steadily every single year. And clearly, our fund balance is not. This graph shows where our revenues, our expenses are exceeding our revenues. And what this shows me is if we continue on the path that we are with the expenses that we have, if we don't address these expenses at these rates, my projection, and I know the county board is not going to let this happen, but my projection is we literally could be out of fund balance in 4 years if we keep this up. So the purpose that in doing this very brief presentation is to point out some of these things and urge the county board to take an extremely conservative approach. There are going to be departments, in my view, that we can't cut. You cannot necessarily cut 911. When someone picks up the phone, they cannot hear, thank you for calling 911. If you have a fire emergency, press 1. If you have a health emergency, press 2. You hit 1 and you hear, thank you for calling 911. Your call will be answered in the order in which it was received. We can't do that. I really am just urging, I know I am viewed somewhat as being pessimistic, but Benjamin Franklin used to say that he was a pessimist, and he was never disappointed and sometimes pleasantly surprised. I just think we have to take an extremely conservative, serious approach to our budget this year, because I don't believe that this is going away anytime soon. I think we have to address the fact that our economy is not going to get better next year, nor is it going to get better the year after, nor is it going to get better the year after that. I think it's going to be a long-term recovery before we see anything. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Good to have food for thought. Ross?
Where do you think the fund balance should be?
I don't have an exact number, but I don't believe that we should go below 19%, because I think we have to anticipate down the road that this isn't going to get any better.
So, I mean, is it your contention that you're afraid to use any fund balance at
No,
all?
no, I'm not.
Okay.
No, I am not opposed to using some fund balance. No, I'm not.
Because my understanding of the whole concept is that these are the times for which fund balance is designed.
We're at, I believe, 21% right now. That, of course, was before this morning's vote. Based on the numbers that Dean gave me, no, I'm not opposed to using some fund balance. But what I don't want to do is take it all the way down. This is just my view. I don't want to take it all the way down to 18%. And then next year say, oh, well, we've got to take it down to 16%. We've got to take it down to 14%. I just think we need to take a more conservative approach. But no, I am not opposed to using some fund balance.
Sonny?
Well, I guess the comments that I have, Chris, is you talk about you want to look at a conservative approach. You know, I've been involved in working on public taxpayer fund balance or budgeting for 30 years. You know, sitting in this room is 100 years of experience of drawing taxpayer-funded budgets. I know a lot of people in financial advisors, and I don't believe you're going to find two people more conservative than Dean Bott and Bill Rokas if you take any two people in the world. We have very conservative advisors that are helping us draw this budget. You know, I sat in these chairs along with a number of your predecessors in 2003 when we cut 22 positions from the county. Those were tough decisions, and I believe that this board is prepared to make tough decisions again. But in the last 6 years, we've grown the fund balance by $6 million. We've built a district court building. We've built a 42-bed expansion in the jail, all without additional tax money. We funded $4 million worth of road improvements without additional tax money. I just don't understand when the Record Eagle reporter calls me the other day and tells me that the county's budget is in shambles, because we are not. We are absolutely viably sound. And as long as this board continues to make conservative and reasonable decisions, this county will remain viably sound. And I'm tired of having this continuous discussion about you want to throw away the fund balance. No one has talked about throwing away the fund balance. We're just budgeting sound monies. And like Ross just said, we've earned this money, we've saved this money, so as in years when we absolutely need to use part of it, we can use part of it. Now, we've budgeted a lot of fund balance over the last, 5 or 6 years that we didn't spend. But that's because we have a very conservative purchasing policy. We work very hard at negotiating our contracts. And that being said, yes, we spend a lot of money each year and our expenses increase, but a sizable piece of that increase is wages that we pay to county employees. And I just get tired of continuously talking about don't spend the fund balance, don't spend the fund balance. And when this Record Eagle reporter calls me and tells me how the county's budget is in shambles, the county's budget is not in shambles, it is sound.
Beth?
Oh, I really should zip it and lock it, but I will. I feel like a little bit like a board therapist, but I feel like you guys aren't really listening to what each other is saying, because I don't think you're as disparate as you think you are. I didn't hear Chris say that we shouldn't spend a dime. And I also am not hearing her say that previous commissioners haven't made good decisions at certain points in time. What I think we're saying is that, there are some new ideas, and taking an approach to this with fund balance in a very articulated way of how we're going to retain some money for making sure that we're financially sound, which we are, and also how we're going to spend or designate any excesses is appropriate. So I think maybe you guys just aren't quite hearing each other, but.
Well, as we know, the budget discussions will continue on through October. We'll meet again, we'll discuss it. So I think for now we can move on to a moment of public comment. If anybody has.
Brian Crow, Community Development Director for the city and Downtown Development Authority Director. I am pleased to let you know that with the strong support of the County Board of Commissioners, the County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, the County EDC, the City of Traverse City, the State of Michigan, and the Downtown Development Authority, we will be opening the Old Town Parking Deck a month and a half ahead of schedule and on budget on Monday, in time for the film festival. You're all invited at 10:30 Monday morning on the 8th Street entrance side to a brief ribbon cutting We will have the ground floor open for the film festival, and sometime during the week, we hope to have the upper levels open. But this is a major accomplishment to come in as early as they have and meet the deadlines we put in front of them, and without your support, this project would have never happened. The economic impact in terms of the future is great. We already have interested parties in the 2 parcels that are adjacent to the deck, and Hagerty's commitment to build now a 44,000 square foot facility, it's doing exactly what we wanted, and I wanted to thank you and invite you to the ribbon cutting.
Under budget and ahead of schedule?
On budget, under, maybe. We're still dealing with the last of it, but way ahead of schedule. They were supposed to open in the middle of September, and they gave us a date of August 3rd, and we said, oh, that'll be a shame to open it right after the film festival. So they've pushed it forward, and we learned day before yesterday that it's going to be available at least ground floor on Monday.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. It's very exciting. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment? All right, we can move on to commissioner reports. Seeing none, notices and announcements. Sonny?
Just a reminder to everyone that there will be a workshop on the Housing Trust Fund. Mary Brooks, a nationally recognized expert, will be here 4 o'clock on the 28th, which will be next Wednesday. I believe that's in the training room, correct, Dean?
I believe it is.
I believe so.
I'm sure it is.
Sorry.
And, everyone is invited to be there. It should be very informative, and the local stakeholders should all be participating also. So it should be an interesting time.
Yes?
Yes, there's going to be a budget hearing by the Parks Board this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I did attempt to meet with Dennis yesterday afternoon, but he canceled me and put the Army Corps of Engineers in my place. But I've asked Jen Seaman to come and address the Parks Board. One of the director's proposals, one of his budget proposals, is to eliminate the union lifeguards. And so I've asked Jen to just please come and address the Parks Commission so that they have an understanding of what they can and cannot do. That's at 2 o'clock today.
Okay. Any other announcements? Dick?
The road is open out on Hammond Road.
Oh.
Not into town, but the bridge.
Keystone to Hammond.
I came over it this morning, but I had to come up Hammond Road.
Great.
Still saved me money.
That's good news.
Yes.
Ross?
Tomorrow night, Thursday, at the Civic Center, there is for lack of a better phrase, I guess, a railroad seminar. The state of Michigan is exploring a statewide railroad policy that I guess they haven't updated theirs in over 30 years. So they are having a seminar. It's a lot of public input at the Grand Traverse County Civic Center from 7 to 9.
Hey. Anyone else? Okay, no closed session needed?
No.
I would entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
All right. We're out of here.